Welcome to the Nourish Child Podcast, a show about childhood nutrition, feeding kids, and dealing with the ups and downs of growing a healthy child. Here's your host, registered dietitian and childhood nutrition expert, Jill Castle.
Have you ever thought about how our kids learn to eat, how they go from a liquid diet to a full range of solid foods? Hey everyone, I'm Jill Castle, your host of The Nourish Child. Welcome to the show. Today, my guest is Dawn Winkelmann, a speech-language pathologist and pediatric feeding therapist specializing in infant swallowing. She has over 25 years of experience teaching parents, therapists, and caregivers how to feed children of all abilities. Miss Dawn is the inventor of several feeding products, including the award-winning EZPZ Tiny Cup and Tiny Spoon for infants, as well as the Mini Cup and Straw Training System, mini utensils, and mini feeding set for toddlers. And I think she has some of those in the background. We can see them. She is also the co-author of the book, Making Mealtime Easy Peasy. Welcome to the show, Dawn.
Thank you so much for having me. It's such a pleasure to be here.
I'm so excited. I've been a big fan of your work. I know of EZPZ, although they came out after my children were kind of already big and grown up. But what a savior for so many families.
Thank you so much. Yes, we were, nowadays, it's like you see all these silicone plates and bowls and a whole bunch of feeding products made out of silicone. But back in the day when we first started, we were the first one. We were the original. So we had the original Happy Mat. So we were the first silicone plate to come out. And then, of course, a whole bunch of plates are out now. But we were the original that really started it all. And our founder, Lindsay Lorraine, she just woke up one day and said, somebody's got to change this, that, bowls and plates can't fly off. And, mealtime was so crazy. She had a young child and then twins. And so mealtime was just hectic for her. And I saw her on Kickstarter and I was like, oh my gosh, this is going to change the feeding industry. Because, I was duct taping plates and bowls to wheelchairs and tables and countertops and trying to help children really make milestones. And, before our product line, we would tell parents hey, you need to introduce a cup or you need to start, scooping, but there was really nothing out there to really facilitate those milestones. So we were, as a therapist, giving all of these, tips and advice, but there was no products to really support that development.
Yeah.
So very excited to be a part of that and being part of the trend, because as feeding therapists, it's we know what we need to do.
Yes.
We just can't do it without the proper tools. So now we can.
Right. No, I mean, that's just so amazing. I would love to deep dive a little bit deeper into your background as sort of how you got to, co-creator or creator of the EZPZ system. But you started out as a speech language therapist, pathologist. Yes. So kind of take us back there and walk us through how you got to today. Because today's very different, right?
Yes, very much so. So, yes, I did my training as a speech-language pathologist. So I have my master's degree in speech pathology and audiology, and I specialized in feeding. My grandmother passed away when I was in my master's program, and she passed away from aspiration pneumonia, and which was completely avoidable if the speech pathologist would have been involved with her working on swallowing. And it really triggered something in me to really hone in on feeding and swallowing skills that most people don't know about, especially parents, when, they usually know milestones and skill sets from gross motor milestones or fine motor milestones or nutrition milestone, but really not oral motor, swallowing, feeding. And so, and even, all the way up from, babies to geriatrics, which is what happened in my experiences. I'm like, wow, if that speech pathologist would have just known a few techniques, my grandmother would have still been alive. And so it really kind of focused my area of expertise in feeding and swallowing. So if a pediatrician has a child that has some difficulties feeding or some difficulty swallowing, they will write a referral to a speech language pathologist or occupational therapist who specializes in feeding and swallowing. So I get a lot of referrals from pediatricians because this area is so difficult. And a lot of speech pathologists and occupational therapists don't want to specialize in feeding, even though we're the experts in it, but because of all of the, issues that could happen, with our profession, we do have a rate of children passing away because of, either ingesting food allergens that, cause some anaphylactic shock, or because we're dealing with that breast support and that swallowing. So a lot of therapists are really afraid from a lawsuit perspective of really specializing in feeding and swallowing. So there's not that many of us out there.
Yeah. I think that probably, I actually have a really good friend who is also a speech pathologist, but she specializes in speech. And she does that in the school system. So there really are kind of different pathways in speech pathology. So you started in, did you work in like the hospital setting and then move to private setting, or how did that all play out?
So I've always had, I'm a medical-based speech pathologist. So I've always worked in acute rehab centers, hospital-based. I even worked in the emergency room for quite some time, all specializing in pediatrics. So working with, kids that have had, trachs or G-tubes or just picky eating, autism, Down syndrome, cerebral palsy, anything that had more of a medical focus. And more as my years continue to go on in this field, the more I'm like, having that medical basis is so key, because everything that we're doing with feeding and swallowing has a possibility of compromising the airway. So it is really having that basis of having that medical training to make sure that we are preventing aspiration and preventing choking. Everyone has, especially now with social media, everyone has a tip, and I'm just like, don't do that. Oh my gosh, it's going to compromise the airway here in social media. But it's really focusing on my background as a medically trained speech language pathologist, and kind of putting that into play to try to make things really easy for families to understand, and kind of using my experience and toning it down to be able to make something very functional and an easy tip for a family to actually work on that night at mealtime.
Yeah, that's so important. And when you talk about that clinical background, that really resonates with me too. I'm a traditionally trained hospital-based clinical dietitian who went into private practice, but oh my goodness, that clinical background just helps so much when you understand different disease states and how they may interact and what potential outcomes could be, just you get the bigger picture. So that resonates with me quite a bit. So you have a private practice now, right?
Yes, yes, I do. And along those lines, what you're saying is, I think that makes us better private practice practitioners, because why I started my private practice was because, you have 40 minutes with a kiddo in the hospital setting, or 30 minutes, depending upon, insurance and everything. And you just can't do it in that amount of time. So I opened up my private practice to help facilitate the family unit, and to be able to, if I want to spend an hour and a half with this family, I'm going to spend an hour and a half with this family. I don't have anyone, kind of breathing down my neck saying, you have to have your paperwork in and you have to have everything done. I really wanted to focus on that connection and trust around mealtime, which sometimes we can do in an hour, but there's families that really need some more support.
Sure.
And I just felt like I could do that more in the private practice setting. And so, I've had my private practice for over 20 years now, which is crazy when I think about that. And being an entrepreneur 20 years ago was much more difficult than doing it now.
Absolutely.
And so I think, that clinical background really helps to facilitate, to make you a better private practitioner, especially with taking continuing education credits. When you're working at the hospitals, or, my colleagues who are working in the schools, they only have a certain amount of funds that allow for continuing ed. And that's usually what I spend the most money on every single year as a private practitioner, is more continuing ed, just to be able to be up, because the world of feeding changes every single year.
Yeah.
And so it's really important to kind of keep on track and making sure that you have the most up-to-date information.
Well, and just look at the last 5 years, baby-led weaning. I mean, that's completely new, brand new. And I know you do a lot with that, but that's just a really great example of how the world of feeding has completely
Yes.
changed
Yes.
in a very good way, I think.
Mm-hmm.
But even, as a dietitian, as a pediatric dietitian, I even look at the world of infant nutrition over the last 5 years. So it's not just baby-led weaning. It's like all the allergy stuff has been flipped on its head. I mean, there's just a lot of stuff that's changed more recently. And you're right. It's really important to stay on top of all of that.
Yes.
So you have EZPZ. How did you go from private practice into the EZPZ brand? And tell me a little bit about that. And feel free to show your products as you talk about them, because we'll be on YouTube as well. So people can actually, in addition to hearing this on Apple Podcasts, they can go watch us on YouTube, which is this is a new thing for my show. So it's really fun for me, and hopefully for my listeners too.
Well, it all started with the Happy Mat. So this is the design that our founder, Lindsay Lorraine, started. And this is what I saw on Kickstarter originally. And I was just overwhelmed with excitement because of how this was going to change the lives of the kids that I worked with. And what makes it different is that it suctions to the table. Yeah. So it allows a child to actually, start to be able to grab food and pick up food and give, families an idea of doing, a protein, a fruit or a vegetable, and a carbohydrate. So it helps to make more meal times nutritionally focused instead of just, a bowl of mac and cheese or a bowl of cereal, so that it can really help to decrease picky eating tendencies, because there's 3 separate compartments and there's just so much here to talk about. But I started using this with all my group therapy clients as well as my individual clients. And I was also teaching at the time at Santa Ana College and, teaching the new speech pathologists that are coming up in the ranks. And when this launched, I even had my students work with it and see the difference between this and a paper plate or a plastic plate that moves around, and how this product just keeps a child's head at mealtime, at midline, so that it decreases the risk of choking, because the neck is not moving around. We're keeping that airway nice and tight, allowing the esophagus to be able to be open in order to swallow more successfully. So that was what drew me to EZPZ. And then I reached out to them and I said to Lindsay, I'm like, this is going to change the entire feeding industry. And, I'd love to work with you. And then I just started consulting, and then I started designing. And so it ended up being really exciting. I launched the Tiny Cup, which is an infant cup. So how this kind of started, you'll appreciate this too, because, here again, we were constantly telling families that they need to work on open cup drinking, that it's a developmental milestone for babies to start drinking from an open cup at 6 months of age. And parents and therapists are like, how do we do that? Yeah. And because we didn't really have anything out there. I mean, I was teaching babies with shot glasses because we didn't have anything. So, right. Or those medicine cups, it's just, there was nothing to really help focus on that developmental milestone until I designed this. What makes this very different, because I tell families too, I'm like, you don't have to do the EZPZ Tiny Cup, but it does have all these different safety features. If you use a Dixie cup, the baby's going to crush it. So, and then throw the Dixie cup. If you use a shot glass, which has happened in my experience too, baby's head control isn't really great. So, you can knock out teeth, split lips. I mean, it can be very damaging. Those medicine cups can have little ridges and can slice a baby's lip open. So went through all that in my experience. And what's different about this is that it's cone shaped on the inside. So what happens is that a baby never has to tilt their head back. So remember, tilting the head back opens up the airway. Well, we don't want the liquids to go down the airway. So this is cone shaped. So the liquids just come out nice and easy. So it's very easy to keep baby's head in that correct position as compared to a sippy cup when, baby is always having to drink and open up that airway. And, a lot of the babies that I work with have ear infections because of that angle, that liquid's going right into the eustachian tubes, causing ear infections and hearing loss and just poor oral control. with the tiny cup, it flexes. So it's nice and soft. So it makes it really easy for babies to be able to drink from the open cup safely and keeping that nice position. And we sell these even in NICUs, because if a mom is struggling with breastfeeding, just like everywhere else in the world, if there's no bottles available, they drink from an open cup.
Yeah.
So it really works from newborn all the way up to 12 months of age. And that was kind of the first start of our developmental product line to be able to really go by ages and stages.
That's amazing. And so you've got cups, you've got the mats, you've got utensils, right? You've got kits, everything, which is great because, the other thing when I'm looking at that cup, I'm sure some babies kind of teethe on that rim a little bit. They chew on it a little bit because it probably feels good.
Yes. It's nice.
Yeah.
And you can, put it in the refrigerator. You can put it in the freezer. It easily can warm, any liquid or food up into the microwave too. So it really has, because it's food grade silicone, it really has a whole bunch of different ways for parents to utilize a cup, not only for liquids, but you can put purees in here. So you can do some starting, solids. Those first foods can actually be in the cup. So you can thin those foods out. You can thicken them up. You can put smoothies in here. So it's a great way for parents to kind of experience, taste and temperature and texture all within the cup and families feel really comfortable, trying something new in a cup as compared to trying something new on the plate. So I really wanted this product to be able to go wherever mom wanted it to, microwave, refrigerator, or freezer.
Yeah.
Wherever she wanted it to go, it could go. So that really can help them be successful with those first tastes.
Yeah, that's great. I love that. So a lot of what we're talking about, you've mentioned, meeting and matching those developmental milestones. So we're really talking about this whole idea of learning to eat. And I don't think I ever thought about learning to eat, even though I was a dietitian and I had 4 of my own children. When they were young, I wasn't like in the mental mindset of, okay, my job is to help this child learn to eat. But now I think from a more modern perspective, that's what a lot of us are trying to do with new parents is help them embrace the role of helping their child learn to eat. So let's talk about what that means. What does it mean to learn to eat? And what are sort of the steps along the way from, I guess, A to Z? That's probably a really big question, but
it is. Woo, here we go. I'm ready. So the first things that come to mind as you were saying that, like learning to eat is being, I think the biggest thing is encouraging parents to let them have baby lead the way. And I know that everybody says that, but when we're really thinking about baby leading the way, I think that's why the baby-led movement is so strong, is because and I always say this, we need to give babies credit for what they're able to do. And if we know babies can actually use a spoon at 6 months of age, why aren't we giving it to them?
Yeah.
If we know that babies are able to reach and cross midline and need to be able to do that, why do we keep putting food on the tray and stimulating this? If we know that babies have this innate ability to learn to eat and do it by themselves with curiosity, just like they do and explore play and language and everything else, then we need to set them up for that success.
Yeah.
If we think about it that way, then we're not, feeding baby on our lap. We're not just putting food onto a tray. We're not just, taking a long-handled spoon and shoving food into a baby's mouth. All of those things change because our perspective changes. So if we just make the food safe, obviously, pick the right foods, if we just really follow their lead, everything changes in that mealtime. And I find that the families that I work with, joy comes from that. Because it is joyful to watch a baby explore an avocado for the very first time. It is joyful for us to watch a baby like put the spoon, start, munching on the handle. We're like, what are you doing? Right? It is fun and joyful to be able to do that if we are focusing on letting baby do that and us just kind of guiding in the way, because when I see families are like, oh gosh, I'm sorry, I don't know why they're chewing on the spoon that way. And I'm like, there's nothing wrong with that. This is a toy, right?
Yeah.
Until baby learns how to eat with it correctly.
Right.
So once we kind of take a step back and really hone in on watching a child discover instead of actually eat, right? It changes everything. And so I think that, that's definitely a philosophy, but it's also, I'm half Hispanic. And so in my Hispanic culture, it is the mother, the woman's job to make sure that food is available. And we just watch. Like my grandma would just sit there and just watch me eat. My mom would just sit there and watch me eat. And I remember feeling so in control because, I had all this attention here just watching me eat. And I think it's a very cultural thing for me that I love to watch babies eat. I love to see them explore a cup for the first time. And so when we just kind of think about the joy that we feel as caregivers watching a child display the curiosity about foods, it not only brings joy to our hearts that a child is doing that, but also I think it helps to facilitate us to want to cook and really share more of what we love to eat and what we love to cook. And so that connection is I think critical. And that's where we lose sometimes when we're really focused on, you need to, do this or do that. I think that we lose that joy.
Yeah.
And babies definitely lose the joy. They just kind of sit there and they want no part of it. Right. So if we just take a step back, and I think that's one thing as a medical professional that was very easy for me to do is to be able to take a step back and be able to see the whole picture. I'm still looking at it from a clinical eye. I'm still looking at it as an expert, but I'm watching that interaction between parent and child and saying, hey mom, have you noticed that your shoulders are like this, like you're so tense, like it's going to be okay.
Yeah.
If he doesn't like the sweet potato, it's fine. Like it's going to be okay.
Yeah.
There's no failure. You're not getting an F,
Right.
There's no failure. Once that happens, you're just like, oh, okay. Like you could just see that whole change. And that's the key to really getting children to eat is being comfortable around food and being comfortable in that space.
Do you worry that your child is more than picky, like a lot more? If you feel like you've tried everything and nothing is working, nothing is getting better, I want you to know there's more to understand. Things like how your child perceives food, who your child is when he is around food, including what motivates him and what demotivates him, who you are when you feed your child, and so much more. All of these things integrate and interact to produce the child you see at the table every night. Let's end all that worry and confusion. Join me for a live 4-hour workshop on November 4th called Nutrition for the Extremely Picky Eater. You can learn the details and register over on thenourishchild.com/extreme picky eating. And letting them have the control. I think that's a boondoggle when parents can figure out that, giving a little bit of, giving a lot or a little or just giving control actually gives the control back to them in a lot of ways.
Yes.
Right? I agree with you, though. I just love to watch kids eat.
So much joy.
It is so much fun, and there's so much joy in it. And I think that, probably you feel this way too, but I feel that a lot of my career has been motivated around bringing that joy back to parents. And especially today when it's so stressful and anxiety provoking, and, they might feel that joy in even that 6-month mark when they start, solids, not that the anxiety around what to feed and how to do it. And it's almost overshadows the joy that can be had there.
Yes,
so,
absolutely.
Now, another area or another time when parents get a little bit frustrated and over-involved, I would say, with feeding their children is that toddlerhood stage and the picky eating stage, and that, where they really need to be letting that toddler lead the way. what would you say about sort of, the process of feeding and the process of a child eating? What are some of the obstacles that you see in your own practice, in your own work, that get in the way of children being independent and sort of autonomous with eating?
I think the first thing is the stress that once you go from babyhood to toddlerhood, that all expectations change for mealtime in general. I can't tell you how many times I've actually had to calm parents down, like, about manners. They're like, it's okay that from a social standpoint, we're not really focusing on that yet, because we're talking, those are cognitive skills.
Yeah.
Or that they're just like, they're toddlers now, they shouldn't be eating with their hands. And then me saying, actually, that is still a milestone. We're still going to actually be eating with our hands. And to try to calm those expectations that once they're a toddler, then, they're supposed to have manners and they're supposed to, constantly use utensils all the time. And all those expectations, yes, those are milestones. We're definitely introducing that fork. We definitely want them to have the pincer grasp and be able to kind of switch between a spoon and a fork. But there is still that childness of eating that is still important. That's still a way to expose kids to a variety of foods, and that the only way that they're going to do that is through their hands. And so, yes, we have those expectations of utensils now, but we also still need to continue to explore. And so to remind families that, now we're offering multiple textures and, so much is going on, and that the face and the mouth is still growing and developing. And what was really easy for a child to eat 3 weeks ago is not the case anymore. Some of the picky eating has to do with the way that the mouth is changing. And
Let's go a little deeper on that one, because I'm interested in hearing this as well.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
So when we look at like a 6-month-old mouth to a 12-month-old mouth, it's very easy to see the difference of the oral cavity, the tongue, the lips. Now we've got a couple teeth, right? That is very easy to see. When we're talking about a 12-month-old mouth to a 3-year-old mouth, that's toddlerhood. We don't see the expectations of what's happening with that mouth and that development of that until I start to remind parents. I'm like, remember when your baby was 12 months old, still a toddler now, but they were still only doing that munch chew. Well, if you look now, they're still doing the munch chew. They're not doing that rotary chew. We need to work on that rotary chew. Why is that not happening? Okay, let's look at that. Let's see how the jaw is changing and what we can do from a different food perspective, kind of help with that rotary chew. All of the primary articulator in speech is the jaw. And it's really the primary muscle when we're actually starting to work on multiple texture foods. When they're infants, they can break everything down with their gum line without the need of any teeth, because we're offering those safe foods. As we move into toddlerhood and we're starting to, add in like sandwiches and quesadillas and all these different mixed textures, well, we need to be able to establish a strong munch chew, but also a strong rotary chew in order to have that grinding of the food to make sure that we're going to swallow that successfully. A lot of kids go through some picky eating because their oral structure changes, but we don't change the food to match that oral change. So a lot of my consultations is coming in, watching. I do in-home feeding therapy. And so I will watch a child and say, oh, yeah, mom, see how she's doing this now? Well, I think we need to go back to some strips to kind of make that easier. We need to help to remind her how to be able to kind of facilitate that jaw movement, because now see how she's starting to suckle again, and really explain the changes in a very simplistic fashion so that parents can say, oh, and then I'm like, you might only need to do this for 2 weeks. To remind her how she's supposed to start chewing, and then you'll start to see that rotary chew again. So we change up the textures of the food, and we serve that just a little bit different for a short period of time so we can re-engage those muscles. I always use the analogy of exercising because I have two passions, feeding kids and exercising. So it's very easy for me. So if we were doing squats, and we were doing squats every single day, and then we broke our leg, right? Well, we're going back to doing squats, and all of a sudden, we're not doing them the way that we used to, or maybe we can only do a certain amount of repetitions. The same thing happens within the mouth. All of a sudden, that tongue is bigger. Well, now this is going to be more difficult for us to eat. So yeah, the child may still like that food. They're not picky about that food anymore. They just can't really manipulate that food with their tongue anymore. But then what do we say? Oh, you don't like that? Oh, you're being picky? All right. Oh, we start to freak out. And so then our language changes, and then we start to stress out. Well, just take a bite. Just take 2 bites. Just try it. Then that pressure kind of comes in when it's really a lot of the time just a child trying to figure out how to do this again.
Yeah. That's so interesting. Yeah, that's so interesting. And I think that will be very helpful for some of the listeners today to hear that, because when you do think about that growth and development and changing of the oral cavity, that makes a lot of sense. How you might have to take a couple steps backwards to and then to move forward a little bit. Do you find that it's common, or I guess not uncommon, for toddlers to have this experience where they are sort of backtracking a little bit before they move forward?
Yes. And I think that's really important to know, because in all development, right? It's when we're going from, first words to, sentences, we do feel like some kids will, backtrack and kind of regress with some words while they're building up that new language. And I think that's very common for us to think about in all other areas of development, except for eating, because we're just like, great, well, now I'm excited for you to try this type of food. And we keep wanting to move forward. So I think it's really devastating to families and to therapists too, that we're just like, I thought my child had this. I thought we had this skill down.
Yeah.
And so it can be really jarring also, because we're doing it 3 times a day.
Yeah.
So, that can be very frustrating for us, but it is really important to think about, all that development. And to really, if we think about that perspective, and again, going back to having the joy of eating, that we need to figure out what else is happening in that moment. If a tooth is loose or we're getting another tooth, those things can change just our bite. So I try to remind parents too, if you have Invisalign, or if you had braces before and you see that your teeth are starting to change, one night you're not wearing your Invisalign, you're like, what happened? Think about that from a child perspective. Yeah. All of a sudden they have a new tooth. Well, now they don't know how to chew again. And their tongue keeps going to where that tooth is, when the tongue is supposed to be coming up and protecting the airway. Well, it's distracted. So you have 2 choices. You either swallow it whole or you refuse it. So some kids will swallow it whole, and the parents are like, oh my gosh, my child's so constipated, and so then we have that issue, or they're swallowing, I'm afraid they're going to choke, or they just stop eating those foods. And so I'm constantly saying, well, let's reassess and let's tell the child. You'd be surprised how many 2-year-olds I'm like, oh, you know why it's difficult for you to eat your favorite, quesadilla? It's because you've got that new tooth and your tongue is all about that new tooth. So we're just going to give that a week. We're going to mark this off, and we're just going to give that a week, and then we're going to reintroduce your sandwiches. So many kids may not understand all of those concepts, but they realize that that new tooth is what's changing things. Yeah. And so then they'll say, Miss Dawn, tooth. And I was like, I know. Look, it's still coming in. Okay, we're gonna try, those new foods that we're so excited about, maybe in 2 more days. Yeah. So it helps to give them the power to kind of understand that too. And even they'll say, can't do that. Because I got another tooth, right? And I'll be like, great. So then they kind of understand that development too. It's not them. They're not a picky eater. They have a new tooth. That changes everything.
Sure. I love development. It's just, it's such, I call it the magic 8 ball. It just informs so many things. Yes. I wish more parents, I wish more, professionals understood how development feeds into eating and all of that stuff. So let's shift gears a little bit, because I know that there are some children out there who are not just typically picky, but they might be more sensory-based picky eating. Are there any sort of tips or advice you might have for parents just to understand why their child might be a little bit more or extended in their picky eating phase than other children?
Yeah, I think the biggest takeaway with sensory in general is to think of the whole environment as a sensory experience. So that's one of the things that I look for when I go into a home is, I try to take all the senses and really hone in on what's the lighting right now. So what is a child seeing? Is that
It's
dogs in the
okay.
background? Sorry about
That's
that.
okay. We all have puppies and kids and
Yeah. What's the lighting doing? So what is that child seeing from a visual sense? I've had so many kids when I've actually sat down where they're sitting, because I try to really engage where the child is, that, there is a glare that's coming, and that glare is reflecting off of the plate, making the child kind of lean back. And so, the more a child leans back and gives that negative tilt, the less likely they're going to eat very much. And so just closing a blind can have the child lean forward, and it changes the entire eating experience. I use the example a lot that if you're eating outside, and the sun is coming in and you kind of have that glare when you're eating, think about the way that feels. Like you are very aware of your visual space, to the point where you might be leaning, or crossing your leg or scooting over more to the side. So now we're changing your posture. So then we're changing your swallowing. And then now we're changing your eating experience. And all of that just builds up on, just because we have some glare from the sun. And then if you're asked afterwards, like, how enjoyable was that meal? You might not say it was very enjoyable, just because of that sun. So we have to look at that for these kids. So a lot of sensory issues with the kids that I work with is something that's very treatable that we can do. We're always looking at, how can we fix the picky eater? But it's really, a lot of it is what we can do. We just have to kind of think outside the box and look at what the child is doing. A lot of the time I see kids that have dangling feet. And I try to explain parents all the time, when your child's feet are dangling, they have an increased likelihood of choking because they have no foot stability. So if they have no foot stability, if they do have a piece of food that goes down the wrong way, the first thing that you and I would do is we would close our mouth, breathe in through our nose, push down on our feet to produce a strong cough. Well, they can't do that. So if you can't do that, then you're definitely not going to try these new foods that you don't know how those foods are going to fill in your mouth, because you don't know if you're going to be able to protect your airway.
Yeah.
So when we think about those things, it makes perfect sense that kids don't want to eat certain foods or don't want to sit in the chair for long periods of time, because of the fact that that's all sensory.
Yeah.
So it's something that that is within our control. And so there's so many things outside of our control in feeding, but those are things that are within our control, and to make it a little bit easier for kids to have a fun experience. Using our products, for example, like this Happy Face, you fill this up with, some yogurt and 2 blueberries, you've got eyes. Like immediately, this lunchtime turns right? It turns it into fun.
Yeah.
So it's just being able to change it up, and even, saying something like, instead of saying, Johnny, lunch is ready, and, Johnny's like, I don't want to eat. Instead of saying, oh, I made you a pirate face. What?
Yeah.
And you could do that just by, covering one eye with some food. I mean, it changes everything to have just a little bit of food art for these kids that do have some sensory issues. And I'll just throw out an idea here from the book that I co-authored. So here is the Happy Mat with some,
cute.
Veggies in there that just makes it fun and exciting. That changes everything, right?
Yeah.
So then I'm like, do you want to eat the hair or do you want to eat the teeth? That is so fun for kids, right? That instead of being like, eat your vegetables, please eat your vegetables. You haven't had any vegetables today. It just can kind of change the way that we look at food. And so I'm like, do you want to eat the antenna or the ears?
Yeah.
Right? It just very quickly becomes something fun.
Yeah.
And these took me 5 minutes to make. So I wanted to make things that were really simple ideas to make some fun food art and whatever the kid is into, right? Yeah. If the child's into Mario, then you're, buying a coral plate to, that looks like those colors. Kids love that stuff. If they're into Frozen, then we're doing, a Frozen theme, right?
Yeah.
it's just more fun. So those are some, ways to bring sensory into that and utilize that to help kids. I mean, that's one of the reasons why we did silicone on all of our utensils too. So even though this is a toddler spoon, this is a nylon head, and silicone here is for that sensory to where kids were really going to want to hold onto it. In my work clinically, kids don't like to use utensils because they're very skinny and it's very hard to hold. It can get cramps for our kids. So they don't want to hold them anymore. So then they try to hold them like this, which is not the way that we're supposed to hold them. So, the research says a short, fat, round handle. So I just took that research and went with it, made a nice silicone handle so that's non-slip grip. So it makes it really simple for kids and beautiful to make it nice for parents to kind of, like that beauty, but simplistic, but nice enough to bring that sensory capability to help increase the likelihood that they're going to use the utensil, which increases the likelihood that they're going to eat from it.
Yeah. Yeah. This is all so great. And I just really love your simplifying so many of the processes of, accumulating foods and textures and some of the barriers and understanding our children better and from a developmental lens is super helpful. I'm curious let's shift to the little business here, a business question, but what is on the horizon? Are you going to be making plates and bowls for bigger kids or?
Yes, actually.
Okay.
That will be coming out at the end of this year, which we're very excited about.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Because it's all developmental, right? So we wanted to have a line that goes through ages and stages. So infants, toddlers, and preschoolers. And that really kind of moves along the continuum so that families know what to expect and what to know what's happening next. So to give you an example, and not to product smash anybody else, but just the difference here is there's lots of products out there for 6-month-olds that are targeted on their packaging for 4 to 6 months old. That includes a spoon, a fork, and a knife. There's no developmental milestones for babies to use a fork. There's no developmental milestones for babies to use a knife. And so parents will call me saying, I think my baby has a feeding disorder. And it's had nothing to do with what that baby is doing and how much of a failure mom is feeling, all because she got a product
that her baby
that was not designed by an expert and making her feel like she's feeling. The baby's completely on track and doing fantastic. But it just that expectation or these, plate sizes, and I'm preaching to the nutritionists here, but plate sizes, right? And parents feel that they're supposed to eat that whole thing. And that's why I wanted to make sure it's all, portion size. Like this is 5 ounces. Like that's the most ever, right? So that they don't feel like their child's supposed to be eating more. They don't feel like that failure. This is absolutely right in the realm. This is a very small bowl because your baby's tummy is very small. So
makes a lot of sense. And I totally appreciate that you rely on the research to guide some of this development, which I think is super important. And it lends a lot of credibility to what you're doing.
Thank you.
So where can my listeners find your products, find you, learn more about you, check out your book, all those fun links that I want to make sure I include in the show notes so people can find everything?
Thank you so much. So you can go to EZPZfun.com to get all of our products. And, we have everything laid out for ages and stages, so that in all different colors, because that's another thing that we really love is we want to have a wide range of colors so that children respond differently to color. And so it's really important to be able to have some different color options there. So we have our primary colors, and then we also have some muted tones too. So from a sensory perspective, some kids like those muted tones. Some kids will gravitate more to those primary colors. So it can really help picky eating from a sensory perspective. And then they can get information from me. I write the blog for EZPZ, but I also have my private practice, which is MissDawnSLP.com. That's MSDAWNSLP.com.
Awesome. Well, Dawn, it's been a true delight to have you on the show. I really appreciate you sharing your expertise with everyone out there. And I wish you the best on this next launch. That's amazing. And let me know if I can help you.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate your support. It was such a pleasure being here and talking with you today.
Take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to the Nourished Child Podcast, where the #1 goal is to help you grow a nourished child inside and out.